The banner above the docking gate read, "Greetings, infant civilization," in clean, careful letters someone had thought that was polite. I stood in the antechamber of the Galactic Council and read it 3 times, not because I needed to, because I wanted to be very sure about what I was walking into. My aide, Lieutenant Bickle, stood behind me and said nothing. He had learned over 4 years of working together that silence was often the correct answer. The antechamber was enormous, high ceilings that disappeared into mist, walls that shifted color every few minutes in what I assumed was some kind of atmospheric welcome display. Every species had their own section, separated by transparent dividers and gentle pressure differentials. Ours was the smallest. 2 chairs, a low table, a tray of water that nobody had asked for. I sat in one chair, Bickle took the other. Our 2 carry-on bags sat between us. The VETH delegation across the room had 47 members. They wore ceremonial layered robes that changed color with their moods. Right now, the VETH delegate closest to the glass was wearing a deep, suspicious purple. He kept looking at our bags. I smiled at him. He looked away first. "Commander," Bickle said quietly, "the session opens in 6 minutes. I know you have been adjusting your translator bead for the past 20 minutes. I stopped touching my ear. The bead was fine. It had always been fine. I knew it was fine. The Kareth delegation filed past our section on their way to the main chamber. 26 members in ceremonial formation, carrying what appeared to be their species equivalent of flags, long, flowing banners depicting historical victories. They moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a people who expected everyone else to wait for them. One of their officials glanced at our section and made a sound that the translator rendered as something close to disappointing. Bickle wrote it down. He wrote everything down. The doors to the main chamber opened. The mist shifted. Somewhere inside, a formal tone sounded low and resonant, the kind meant to make your chest feel something. I stood up, straightened my jacket, the duty jacket, not the parade one. I had the parade jacket packed. I had made a decision about which one to wear, and I had made it deliberately. "Ready?" Bickle asked. "Walk with me." The chamber was the size of an aircraft hangar on a good day and a small city on a bad one. Curved tiers of seating rose in concentric circles from the central floor, every seat filled. 300 delegations. The air had a particular quality to it, clean, slightly cool, processed through 600 atmospheric filters to be breathable by every species present simultaneously. It smelled like nothing. That was somehow worse than if it had smelled like something. I walked to the central podium. The room watched. 300 species looking at 2 humans and 2 carry-on bags. The room had the specific quality of quiet that meant they had already decided what this was. The council chair, a Mhari, whose translator rendered their voice as a deep, patient rumble, formally opened the session. Humanity was welcome to its first appearance before the full council. Recorded applause came from several delegations. The Kareth did not applaud. Then the VETH liaison interpreter stepped forward. His name, the program said, was Orath. He had spent 43 years studying human civilization through intercepted broadcasts, archived media, linguistic analysis, and what he described in his credentials as comprehensive cultural immersion. He was proud of this, it showed. He approached the podium with the energy of a man about to give the presentation of his life. He had a display screen. He had prepared slides. The first slide said, "Understanding our newest friends, a journey into human culture." There was a picture of the Earth at sunrise on it. I stood to the side and kept my face completely still. Orath spoke for 6 minutes about human history, human values, human art, human family structure. He was not wrong. Exactly, he was the way a photograph of a meal is not wrong about the meal. He talked about humanity's capacity for cooperation, its love of community, its deep emotional bonds. Several delegates nodded. The emotion glands came out early. Then he said he had prepared a cultural greeting. He sang the first 2 bars of "You Are My Sunshine." His voice was surprisingly good. The chamber was moved. The Keth delegation produced small audio recorders. The Veth in the audience, Orath's own species, straightened with what the translator told me was pride. Orath finished. He spread his hands in a gesture that meant, across most of the known species, something like, "Please accept this offering from my heart." I walked to the podium. He stepped aside, beaming. I looked out at 300 delegations. I adjusted the translator bead. It still did not need adjusting. "Thank you," I said to Orath. I meant it. Then I said, "That song is about a man threatening a woman who left him." Silence. Not the quiet of confusion, the quiet of a room recalibrating. "The full lyrics," I said, "describe a man telling a woman that she has taken his happiness, ruined his sleep, and warning her that she will regret leaving. It is considered a folk standard. We sing it to children." I paused. "We are a complicated people." Orath stood very still. The slides behind him still showed the Earth at sunrise. I do not say this to embarrass anyone. I said, I say it because the next few discussions will go better if we begin with an accurate picture of what humanity is, rather than the picture we looked like from the outside. I opened my briefing folder. Now let us talk about what we are actually bringing to this table. The translator bead crackled. I left it alone. Behind me, Bickle was writing something down. I did not need to look to know he was smiling. The Karath delegate in the 3rd tier had turned the deep color that their species produced when something did not go the way they expected. I filed that away right next to the banner, right next to infant civilization. I had a long memory. 300 species were looking at me differently now than they had been 3 minutes ago. The council chair's expression, through the translator's best effort, read as something between fascinated and deeply unsettled. Good. Unsettled was a start. The inspection team arrived at Reach Station on a Tuesday. And GT snorts. And GT, which was the kind of detail that should not have mattered and somehow did. 7 delegates, full ceremonial dress. They came down the docking ramp in a formal procession, and Bickle nudged me and said very quietly that the combined value of their ceremonial accessories was probably greater than our station's entire fuel budget. I met them at the dock in my duty uniform, the scuffed one. The lead assessor was Orath, back again. Presumably because no one else had bothered to learn enough about us to lead the review. He had recovered from the council session with the resilience of a man who had decided to reframe the experience as educational. He carried a fresh clipboard. He had a new set of slides on his data pad. Behind him were two Keth delegates, two Kareth observers, and a pair of small, very quiet beings from a species I had not dealt with before, whose translator tags identified them as Imravi. The Imravi said nothing. They had large eyes. They watched everything. Commander Ase, Orith said with genuine warmth, "We are looking forward to a thorough and productive assessment." "Welcome to Reach Station," I said. "We will do our best." We walked them through the main bay, and the main bay did what the main bay always did, which was exist in a state of organized chaos so precise that it looked like disorder to anyone who did not know how to read it. A cargo loader and a drone technician were mid-argument about structural load tolerances near the east wall, not shouting. They were using the focused, enthusiastic tone of two people who genuinely loved the same problem. A pilot named Cora was doing push-ups under her docked fighter, not stretching push-ups. She did not stop when we walked past. She nodded at me. I nodded back. From somewhere in the upper maintenance level came the sound of welding, and at the same time, a voice running through a comms check. These were not separate people. Oreth wrote something on his clipboard. I did not ask what. The first formal stop was the command center. Clean, functional, two main display walls showing live sector feeds, a duty crew of 8 running their rotations. Standard enough, except that the duty crew chief, Owen, 28, who had been awake since 400 and looked every minute of it, was also holding a half-eaten sandwich. And the secondary display wall had a corner section running what appeared to be a very old strategy simulation game. Training application, Owen said before I could say anything. He put the sandwich down. Pattern recognition. Drills for transit navigation. Orith looked at the screen. That appears to be a vintage entertainment program, he said. Yes, Owen said. It is also the best reaction time trainer we have found. We ran the comparison data. Would you like the data? Orith wrote something down. The armory was next. Our armorer was a woman named Petra. She was 51 years old, had been in military service since she was 19, and had the specific energy of someone who had found their exact right place in the universe and never intended to leave it. She loved weapons the way some people loved music, not the violence of them, but the engineering, the precision, the satisfaction of a thing that did exactly what it was designed to do. She walked the delegation through the rack with the quiet pride of someone giving a tour of a gallery they had personally curated. The Kareth observer stopped at the third rack. He leaned in. He said, "These have been modified, improved," Petra said pleasantly. "The standard specifications have been altered in 14 documented ways." Yes, she pulled one down and began pointing out each modification with the unhurried patience of a woman who had been asked this question many times and was never tired of answering it. Field trigger reset for cold weather response, grip adjustment for left-hand carry, heat disposal fins added here. We found the original design ran warm and extended engagements. Site rail relocated 3 cm for improved acquisition speed. These modifications were made in the field, the Kareth observer said. Some of them some in post-engagement Review a few mid-engagement. A beat of silence. Mid-engagement, the observer said. We find that is when you notice what is not working, Petra said. She set the weapon back in the rack with a careful click. Would you like to see the modification log? We document everything. There was a log. It was several hundred pages. Orith's pen had slowed down. We moved to the medical bay. The medical bay was clean, well lit, and properly staffed. The delegation visibly relaxed upon entering, which I noted. Competent medical infrastructure was apparently a comfort point, a signal of stability. They expected order here. They found order. They also found above the row of recovery beds a whiteboard. The whiteboard had 12 names on it, each followed by a number. Some numbers had been crossed out and replaced. Numbers appeared to be dates. The Karath delegate stared at it for a long moment, then he turned to our medic, a young man named Eli, and said, "What is this?" "Discharge pool," Eli said. He said it the way you explain something that is completely normal. Personnel in recovery estimate their own discharge dates. Whoever gets closest wins the pod. They are betting, the Karath delegate said slowly, on their own recovery. It keeps morale strong. People focus better when there is something to aim for. It gives them a sense of control over the process. They track their own progress instead of waiting. Eli shrugged. The data shows that people who participate recover about 12% faster on average. The Karath delegate took out a small recording device and photographed the whiteboard. Then he photographed it again from a slightly different angle. Then he wrote something in his notes. That was too small for me to read. The Amhari said nothing. They were looking at everything with those wide, still eyes. We had been walking for about 90 minutes. When we reached the lower training level, Sergeant Dio Mensa was sitting on a crate near the south wall eating synthetic noodles out of a helmet. Not his helmet, one of the spare practice helmets from the rack by the door. He used it as a bowl because it held the right amount, and he found carrying a separate bowl unnecessary. He was 19 years old and had the particular focus calm of someone whose brain was always running 3 problems at the same time. He looked up when we came in. He nodded at me. He nodded at the delegation. Then he said, "Good timing. I wanted to ask someone about this." He reached beside him and picked up several pages of hand-drawn notes, diagrams, notations, lines connecting points in what I recognized as spatial grid mapping. I have been running the Council's public defensive architecture through engagement scenario models, he said. He held up the pages, not the restricted information, just the publicly posted infrastructure, the transit lane positioning, the station placements, the standard patrol intervals. He spread the pages out on the crate. I found 4 significant vulnerability windows. Here, and here. He pointed to 4 separate diagrams. None of them require heavy force to use. A coordinated small unit action could realistically reduce Council response time by 40% in the outer sectors. The delegation was very quiet. I put it together during night watch. Dio said, "I was bored. I thought someone might find it useful." He paused. "No offense to anyone present. It is just the way my brain works." Orith had stopped writing. He was holding his clipboard at his side, looking at Dio Mensa, this 19-year-old, eating noodles from a practice helmet in A basement training room with an expression that the translator could not quite render. Then he turned to me. "Commander Osai," he said, "is this really a human army?" I had been waiting for that question. Not from him specifically, but from someone eventually. "No," I said. "This is the one we let you see." Orith looked back at Dio. Dio offered him a noodle because that was just the kind of person Dio was. Orith did not take it, but he stood there a moment longer than he needed to before he started walking again. The delegation requested an early end to the inspection, 48 hours to, as they phrased it, reassess their assessment parameters. I walked them back to their shuttle. Mika walked beside me. "The noodle offer was a nice touch," he said quietly. "I had nothing to do with the noodle offer." "I know," he said. "That is what made it perfect." I went back to my office. My coffee was cold. I drank it anyway. The threat assessment committee arrived with a rubric. I had read the rubric, 42 assessment criteria across 6 categories: firepower rating, unit cohesion index, command chain fidelity, response, latency, tactical flexibility score, and what the 6th column called in careful diplomatic language, civilizational stress threshold, which meant how much could you take before you stopped working. Every species assessed had a number. That last column, a point of collapse, the threshold past which a unit became non-functional, past which a civilization stopped making rational decisions, past which the machine broke down. I had read all the numbers. Some were surprisingly high. None of them had a blank. The committee was 9 members: Karath, Veth Imhari, and 2 from species I had met only in files, the Ashari and the Erlith. The Ashari moved like water, looking for a lower place. The Erlith stood completely still at all times, except when they were moving, and when they moved fast, I noted. Both. The exercise scenario was standard: 2 squads, 12 personnel combined, simulated hostile terrain, a ruined facility, structure with limited cover, limited visibility, 2 objectives to reach, and secure timer running. The committee would observe from an elevated platform above the arena with full sensor access. My 2 squad leads were Corporal Rays and a staff sergeant named Finn. Rays had been doing this for 6 years. Finn had been doing it for 11. They both had the easy, unhurried walk of people who had learned that composure before a situation was worth more than any equipment check. The committee settled onto the observation platform. Data feeds came live. One of the Karath members opened a prepared checklist and began reading it carefully. The exercise started. For the first 6 minutes, everything ran clean. The 2 squads moved through the structure with good spacing, good communication, and a controlled pace. Finn's team reached the first objective and secured it in under 4 minutes. The Keth member started checking boxes. Orith, who had come along, I was beginning to suspect he was genuinely curious about us, which I found interesting, wrote notes. Then the support drone went down. It happened between 1 second and the next, a component failure in the relay. Unit real, not simulated, just a piece of equipment that had been running past its service date because our resupply schedule ran behind. The drone dropped, clipped the comms relay tower on the way down, and took the tower with it. The comms went dark. and a piece of shrapnel, small and fast. An entirely indifferent caught Corporal Ray's in the left shoulder. The sensors on the committee's board registered it immediately, real tissue. Impact, real blood. The MHFY representative began composing a suspension protocol on her data pad. Nobody suspended the exercise. Ray's went to one knee. She stayed there for 4 seconds, just 4, and then she reached into her kit, pulled out a compression wrap and bound her own shoulder with her spare bootlace because her hands were busy and the bootlace was already in her hand. She stood up. She was back, moving in under 20 seconds. The comms dark squad was now operating with no central coordination, no drone support, no relay link to Finn's team, no way to confirm objective status. What they had was 12 people, their training and each other. They invented a hand signal system, not a new one entirely, elements from 3 separate training modules combined and adjusted on the spot to cover the specific gaps their current situation created. I watched it happen through the observation feed, watched it move through the squad in real time. One gesture, a quick confirming nod, a modification added by the person at the back that worked better than the original, and then they were operating again as a unit, as if the comms had never gone down. They completed the objective 7 minutes behind schedule. The committee platform had gone quiet around the 4-minute mark. At the 7-minute mark, when the exercise concluded and the final confirmation signal went up, the quiet had a different quality, not the careful quiet of people watching a test, the quiet of people who had just seen something and were still deciding what to call it. The Keth member had stopped checking boxes. The checklist was on the desk beside him. He had not looked at it in several minutes. Oreth was not writing. I walked up to the platform. "Any questions?" I said. A long pause. Then the Keth member said slowly, "Your soldier, Corporal Ray's, she was injured during the exercise." "Yes." She continued. "Yes." She treated her own injury mid-operation and continued the primary objective. "Yes." He seemed to be searching for something. His translator bead flickered, not a malfunction, just the brief pause it made when it was working hard to find equivalent words. "In our military doctrine," he said, "an injury of that severity triggers an automatic unit withdrawal for medical care and command reassessment." "That is a reasonable approach," I said. "You do not do this. We assess the situation. If mission continuity is possible, we continue." Ray's made the call. "She made the call herself," he said, "without command authorization. Her command was unreachable. She had the situational awareness and the training to make the judgment, so she made it." I paused. "That is the point." The MHFY representative set down her data pad. She looked at me with the specific focus of someone who had been in council service for a long time and had learned to recognize when something mattered. "I would like to ask about your collapse threshold data," she said. I had prepared a briefing, full comparative data across every species on the committee's own assessment records, their collapse thresholds, their non-functional points, the exact metric they had used to measure everyone, including the slot they had prepared to fill in for humanity. I walked through it species by species. Threshold numbers, engagement data, functional decay curves. The committee watched in silence. Some of the numbers were their own, nobody objected. Then I came to humanity's column. We have a threshold, I said, every system does. We are not claiming otherwise. I clicked to the next slide. It was empty. We just have not found it yet, I said. Nobody spoke. At the bottom of the observation platform steps, almost outside the arena boundary, there was a cracked helmet. Visor lying in the dirt, it had fallen. During the exercise, dropped from someone's kit, knocked loose in the chaos near the comms tower. It was small, cracked down the center. Completely ordinary. The Keth member's eyes went to it, then back to the screen, then back to it. He was not the only one. Something about that cracked visor kept pulling their attention. I did not explain it, I did not need to. They were doing the work themselves, looking at this small broken piece of standard human equipment, just a piece of gear that had been used hard and cracked and had not been replaced yet, and fitting it into the picture alongside everything else they had seen today. The exercise debrief ended. The committee requested a second session, a full tactical review, and a follow-up on the collapse threshold. Data. Of course, I said. I walked back down to the training floor. Reyes was sitting on a bench, getting her shoulder looked at by Eli. She looked up when I came over. Sorry about the delay, she said. 7 minutes was sloppy. You were fine, I said. Could have been 4. Next time, I said. She would be back on rotation in 4 hours. She had already asked Eli to make at 3. I walked back to my office. Bickle was at the desk writing his report. The Keth delegate never picked up the visor, he said without looking up. No. Why do you think they kept looking at it? I poured my coffee. Too hot, I drank it. Because it told them more than they briefing did, I said. The procession corridors had a particular kind of energy, and I had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather. This was not diplomatic energy, this was tactical energy wearing diplomatic clothes. I knew the difference because I had spent my entire career in rooms where the thing everyone was pretending was not happening was the only thing that mattered. 3 factions were working the floor. I watched them from the far end of the corridor near the entrance to the delegates' lounge with a cup of coffee I was not drinking and an expression I had been wearing since 600. The Veth block was the easiest to track. They moved in clusters, always with the same 3 or 4 central figures, and their mood robes were running a consistent medium blue that translated as something between cautious and we already have an agreement. They had been building this agreement for 4 days, I knew because Bickle had the intercept summaries. The Karath coalition moved differently. Individual contacts, brief exchanges. Nothing that looked coordinated because it had been specifically designed not to look coordinated. Their lead delegate, a tall, composed official named Oren, who had been the voice of the formal dissent since my council debut, worked the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for decades and found it genuinely enjoyable. He smiled at everyone. He smiled at me. I smiled back. He was good at his job. That was worth acknowledging. The third faction I had labeled the ones who smile while they move pieces, because I did not yet have enough data to name them properly, and that description was accurate. Bickle appeared at my shoulder with a data pad and a quiet expression. Final count, he said. The uncontained variable classification has 17 sponsors. The protectorate motion has 9. Ally status has 11 confirmed and 4. Leaning. Leaning which way? Depends on who speaks to them in the next 40 minutes. I put down my coffee, then let us go. Speak to them. We worked for 38 minutes, not with promises. I did not have anything to promise, and promises made in corridors before votes were the kind of thing that created problems later. We worked with information, the clean version of what the committee had seen, the actual data from the collapse threshold briefing, the modification logs, the recovery pool, Dale Mensa's security analysis, which I had formatted as a formal intelligence document and submitted through official channels, which had made Orath visibly uncomfortable and me quietly satisfied. By the time the session bell sounded, 2 of the 4 leaning delegates had landed in our column. The third was still soft. The 4th had gone to speak to Oren and had not come back, which told me what I needed to know about the 4th. The chamber filled. 300 delegations, every seat. The air was the processed, nothing smelling air of a room trying to accommodate everyone and serving no one particularly well. I sat in the observer section, no floor rights, no vote there as a courtesy, with Bickle beside me and my hands in my lap and the voting console in front of me that I was not allowed to touch. My knuckles were the wrong color. I noted that and let it be. The council chair opened the session and laid out the 3 positions formally. The protectorate motion, the AL classification, the uncontained variable proposal, which was explained as a new assessment category for civilizations whose behavioral patterns required extended observation before formal status could be assigned. That was a careful way to say, we do not know what to do with this and we would rather delay than decide. The Kareth delegate Oren took the floor. He was, I will say this again, very good at his job. He did not use the word threat. He never used the word threat. He talked about predictability, about the importance of predictability in a multi-species council structure, how the stability of the entire body rested on each member's ability to anticipate the behavior of every other member, to plan around known patterns. He talked about how a civilization that modified its weapons during active combat, that continued objectives despite equipment failure and personnel injury, that produced tactical vulnerability assessments as personal projects during spare time. How a civilization like that introduced an element that could not be modeled. He was not wrong. That was the part that required me to sit very still with my hands in my lap. He built his case carefully, generously, without apparent hostility, acknowledging humanity's capabilities, acknowledging the council inspection, data, acknowledging the exercise, results. He framed all of it as evidence not of aggression but of something more complicated. We are not saying humanity is dangerous, he said. We are saying humanity is unpredictable, and in a body that functions on trust in anticipation, unpredictability is its own category of concern. Several delegates were nodding. The third leaning delegate, the one I had not yet reached, was nodding too. The voting console in front of me did not move. I kept my hands in my lap and my face where it was. The floor opened for formal response. The M. Hari representative spoke briefly. in support of ally status. Clear, well-reasoned, citing the inspection data and the committee assessment. She was good, not as theatrical as Orrin, but solid. 2 other delegates spoke in favor of the uncontained variable proposal. Then the floor was quiet. I was not supposed to have floor rights. I stood up anyway. The chamber reacted with a kind of disturbance that is not quite sound, a collective shift, a change in the air. 300 beings recalibrating at once. The council chair straightened, Orith. 3 rose up in the gallery, went very still. Commander Ase, the council chair, said, "You do not have floor standing in this session." "I know," I said, "I will be brief." Someone from the Karath section made a formal objection. I acknowledged it with a nod and kept talking because the objection was on the record and I would accept the consequences, and I had 45 seconds before the chair was required to formally remove my access, and 45 seconds was enough. Delegate Orrin is right, I said. We are unpredictable. We adjust our tools. When the tools do not work, we keep moving. When the plan breaks, we do this because we live in a universe where plans break and tools fail, and the only variable we can consistently control is whether we stop or whether we continue. I paused for exactly 1 second. You are correct that this is difficult to model. You are correct that it introduces complexity. What I want to suggest briefly, and then I will sit down, is that the question you are actually trying to answer is not whether humanity is stable. I looked at Orrin. He was watching me with the careful attention of a professional who respected a capable opponent. The question, I said, is whether we are yours. The chair called the formal reprimand. I sat down. Bickle's expression beside me suggested several emotions that he was keeping in very good order. The formal censure took 4 minutes. I accepted it formally. I signed the acknowledgement form. I put it in the folder I had brought specifically for this purpose because I had known walking in this morning that I was going to stand up, and I had known I was going to be censured, and I had decided both of those things were acceptable. Then something happened that was not in any model, any briefing, or any of Bickle's careful corridor data. The Harry spoke. The Harry were the oldest civilization in the council. Their delegation had been present at every session since the council's founding, which was longer ago than humanity had had written language. They did not vote. They had not spoken in a recorded session in 40 years. Their representative was an entity that the translator rendered as elder presence, and whose physical form redistributed itself across the space it occupied, rather than moving through it in the conventional sense. When it spoke, the room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something significant is happening and everyone in the room knows it at the same time. It produced a record 11 seconds of footage on the main display. The quality was old, 2,000 years old, the timestamp said. It showed a species the translator had no current record for because that species was gone. It showed the council vote from 2,000 years ago. It showed the number 17 sponsors, which was the same number that Orrin's proposal had today. It showed the aftermath. The Harry elder said very quietly, "We were afraid. The species we classified as uncontained variable had potential that we did not yet understand, and that potential made us afraid, and we voted Out of our fear, they are gone now. We are not proud of that record. The chamber was absolutely still. I will not do that again, the elder said. I do not ask others to share my position. I offer only this record, and this I have observed every species that has stood in this chamber in my time. I have never observed a species more unpredictable or more adaptive than they. Humans, I have also never observed a species that argued with themselves this thoroughly before walking into a room. This does not suggest instability to me. It suggests exactly the kind of nature this council was built by. It went quiet. It had said what it came to say. The vote ran. Ally status passed not unanimously. The Kareth delegation lodged a formal dissent. Oren signed it with the composure of a man who had lost cleanly and knew it. I noted the dissent. I stored it carefully in the same place I stored the infant civilization banner and every other thing that would need to be remembered later. After the session in the corridor, Bickle asked me if I was relieved. I thought about it honestly. Ask me in 10 years, I said. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. While I was in session, I drank it anyway. 3 months before the Vreth Silence Fleet translated into council space, I moved our ships. I did it quietly. No formal request, no authorization chain, no council oversight committee review. I repositioned 4 destroyers and 2 rapid response carriers to cold running, holding patterns in the outer sectors, using navigational logs that would read as routine patrol extensions if anyone ran a standard audit. If someone ran a detailed audit, they would find exactly what I had done, and I would have to answer for it, and I had already decided that was an acceptable outcome. Bickle knew. He did not ask me to file the paperwork, which meant he had also looked at the Vreth transit data and reached the same conclusion I had. The Vreth silence moved in a pattern, not the chaotic, aggressive pattern of a force driven by anger or desperation. Patient, methodical, the kind of patience that came from either very good planning or a very long view of time, and from what I had pulled together across the intercepts in the public record in a 40-page analysis I had sent to the council 4 months ago and never received a meaningful response to. The Vreth had both 4 civilizations gone in 11 years, not conquered, not occupied, gone, no signal, no wreckage, no survivors, no record after a certain date except silence. The council's official intelligence summary described this as ongoing threat assessment required. The council's unofficial response, which I had reconstructed from 3 separate diplomatic channels and 1 very tired Vreth analyst I had bought coffee for, was closer to, we are hoping this resolves itself. I drank too much coffee in those 3 months, too hot every cup. I drank it anyway. The emergency session was called on a Thursday. I walked into the chamber with Becan, the Kareth dissent in a folder under my arm. I had been carrying it every day, not out of stubbornness, but because I found it useful to stay precise about who was on which side of which line, and the dissent was a very clean document on that subject. Every delegation was present. The emergency alert had gone out at 300, and by 700 the chamber was full, which was notable because the council's standard assembly protocol required 72 hours of formal notice for a full session. They had waived it. That alone told me how seriously they were taking this. The briefing was thorough and deeply alarming in the way that thorough briefings about deeply alarming things tend to be. And GT snorts. And GT, all the data organized clearly, all the numbers in the right columns, all the evidence pointing in one direction, and at the end of it a gap where the solution was supposed to be. 4 civilizations gone, projected breadth, transit path intersecting with 3 more council member territories within 18 months. Combined council military force rated at approximately 60% of what the models indicated would be required for a successful engagement. The gap between 60% and 100% was not a small gap. The chamber sat with those numbers. Then it began doing what large, deliberative bodies do when they are afraid and do not want to say so. Directly, it discussed process, authorization frameworks, escalation, protocols, joint command structures, the legal parameters of a multi-species military engagement under council charter, whether the existing mutual defense clauses required amendment before activation, and if so, what amendment process applied, and whether the current session had the standing to conduct a required vote without additional formal notice. I sat in the observer section with my hands in my lap and my coffee going cold on the desk beside me, and the KREF dissent in its folder, and I listened to this for 22 minutes. Then Biquet put his hand on my arm. Briefly, he was not stopping me, he was acknowledging that he knew what I was about to do. I stood up. This time I did not wait for the chair to acknowledge me. Floor writes in an emergency session, operated under different protocols than standard sessions, and I had read those protocols 3 times in the past week. And I had floor rights. I want to ask the chamber a direct question, I said. The room settled. Not about process, about what you want. I looked at the main display, where the Vreth transit projection was still running. Then I looked at the chamber. You have options. You can engage using the combined council force, and the models give you about a 30% success probability at acceptable loss levels. You can pursue diplomatic contact, which 3 previous civilizations attempted and for which there is no recorded response. I paused. Or you can authorize humanity to fight. The room was quiet. Not under council command structure, I said, not with council engagement protocols, not with pre-authorized force levels and committee-reviewed tactical frameworks. You authorize us to fight the Vreth silence, and we fight it the way we fight things. You will not always like what that looks like. Some of what we do will not be in any manuals. You recognize there will be decisions made in the field that no committee reviewed and no authorization signed off on. I looked at Oren, who was watching me from his section with the careful, steady attention he had given me since the first council session. You will want afterward to put some of those decisions on record. I am fine with that. The record is the record. Oren said, you are describing a blank authorization. I am describing a trust decision, I said, which is a different thing. Blank authorization means we can do anything. A trust decision means you believe we will do what is necessary and stop when the necessity ends. I picked up my coffee without thinking about it. Cold, I set it back down. Those are not the same. You need to know which one you are making. The Kaith delegate, who had not spoken in Any session I had attended said, "What is your projected success probability?" "I do not have one." A long pause. "We do not work with projected success probabilities," I said. "We work with objectives. The objective is to stop the breath silence from taking any more council territory. That is the objective. We will work the problem from there." Oren raised his hand formally, requesting direct address. The chair acknowledged him. "Commander Asai," he said, "you understand that if this authorization passes and your forces engage without council oversight, and if the engagement fails or produces outcomes that the council considers unacceptable, humanity's ally status becomes a deeply complicated matter." "I understand. You are accepting that risk on behalf of your civilization." "I am accepting it on behalf of this council," I said. "My civilization already accepted it when I moved our ships 3 months ago." "A beat." "You moved your ships," Oren said. "Yes." "Without authorization." "Yes." He looked at me for a moment, then very quietly he said, "Where are they now?" "Outer sectors," I said. "Cold running. Holding pattern, waiting." The chamber absorbed this. The realization moved through it visibly. Not panic, but a specific recalibrating kind of attention. The understanding that the question they had been debating for the past 40 minutes had already been partially answered 3 months ago by a decision made without them. I watched it land differently in different sections. The Kaith delegates' expression did something I had no translation for. Orith had gone very still in the gallery. The Imravi, always present, always watching with those wide, quiet eyes, had oriented toward me in a way that felt significant. The Amhari elder said nothing, but it was paying attention in a way that took up more space than usual. The vote was still running, had been running in formal background process while we talked, and then the emergency alert changed. Not a status update, a contact signal. The Vreth Silence Fleet had translated into council space. Not in 18 months, not in the projected window, now, 6 hours ahead of every model, every projection, every careful assessment the council's intelligence services had prepared. The main display shifted to the contact feed, and the chamber went from deliberation to crisis in the specific way that shift happens when the clock runs out mid-sentence. Someone near the back of the chamber said something I did not catch. 3 delegations stood simultaneously. The authorization vote, still in background process, began generating formal delay requests. Our ships were already moving. I knew because my comm unit lit up at the same moment the contact signal hit, and Finn's call sign was on it, and the message was 4 words: contact confirmed, moving now. I had not told Finn to move. I had not needed to. I had positioned the ships, briefed the squad leads, and trusted that when the signal came, they would know what to do with it. They did, because that was the kind of people we had spent 20 years building. The tactical display on the main screen updated in real time. Council sensor feeds showing the Vreth transit signature, massive, organized. The patient geometric precision of a force that had done this before and expected to do it again without difficulty. And then in the outer sectors, 6 small human signatures resolved from cold running and began to move toward the contact. The chamber watched the display. The Vreth force was larger, significantly larger by the metrics. Every delegation in this chamber understood the engagement developing on that screen should have been brief and conclusive. It was not brief. The fighting ran for 12 hours. I will not make it sound clean because it was not clean. It was 12 hours of the most adaptive, continuously improvised combat I had watched in my career, and I watched every minute of it on the sensor feed from the observer section while the chamber around me moved through 7 different phases of reaction that I tracked without looking away from the screen. The Vreth silence had a pattern. Every engagement in their 11-year expansion had followed the same structure: initial contact, systematic suppression, withdrawal of the opposing forces, ability to coordinate, and then the silence. The thing that followed the silence was not something the records described in useful terms. It was simply nothing. Where a civilization had been, nothing remained. They had never encountered a force that did not follow their pattern back at them. Finn's teams did not follow the pattern. When the Vreth suppression wave came in, designed to cut coordination and isolate units, the units did what they always did: they adapted. They found 3 different ways to maintain functional coordination using systems the Vreth had no framework for disrupting, because those systems had been invented in the previous hour. When the second suppression wave came, targeting the improvisations the Vreth had observed in the first engagement, Finn's teams had already changed approaches again. Corporal Ray's shoulder fully healed, rotation completed, back in the field, coordinated a flanking movement that existed in no tactical database, because she had built it from pieces of 4 different historical engagements she had studied during her recovery, combined with a navigation approach that the Council's own transit analysts had previously classified as theoretically possible but practically unlikely to succeed. It worked. At hour 9, the Vreth fleet began changing its formation, not advancing, not the systematic geometric progression that had preceded every previous engagement in their expansion history, adjusting, reconfiguring, running each change against whatever internal modeling system drove their decisions. At hour 11, they began withdrawing, not the retreat of a force that had been outgunned, something different, the way something moves when it encounters a category of problem that its framework was not built to handle. The chamber was completely silent. On the display, 6 small human signatures held their position in the outer sectors. The Vreth withdrawal continued. The silence that followed had a texture to it, not emptiness but fullness, the kind that arrives when something significant has just occurred and has not yet been named. The Mhari elder said very quietly, "There it is." Nobody asked what that meant. Everyone in the chamber already knew. The authorization vote, still technically in process, passed retroactively in the session that followed, formally on the record with full council standing. It passed with a significant majority. The Karath delegation voted in favor. Oren voted in favor. He found me afterward in the corridor. He stood across from me for a moment in the way that people stand when they are composing what they intend to say. Then he said, "You moved those ships before you had authorization?" "Yes." If the engagement had failed, that would have ended humanity's council standing. "Yes." He looked at me for a moment. How did you know it would not fail? I thought about the honest answer to that question, about Ray's binding her shoulder with a bootlace and standing up in 4 seconds, about Deo Mensa eating noodles from a helmet and drawing vulnerability diagrams because he was bored on night watch, about the recovery pool on the whiteboard and the modified weapons and the strategy game on the secondary display that was also a training tool, about every small, specific, slightly unlikely thing I had watched my people do in every situation that did not go the way the plan said it would, about every version of the answer that I had seen in 3 months of watching breath, data, and knowing this was coming. I did not know, I said. I knew what we were. He nodded. That seemed to be enough for him. I walked back to my office. Bickle was at the desk with his report open and the Karath Descent folder sitting beside his coffee. He had moved it from my desk to his at some point during the session. He looked up when I came in. The Descent, I said. I thought you might not want it in your hands right now, he said. I can put it back. No, I looked at it for a moment. File it. He filed it correctly, formally, under the right archive and the right date. I poured my coffee. It was too hot. I sat down at my desk and drank it and thought about 10 years from now and whether that would be long enough to know how this turned out and whether the answer to Bickle's question, the one he always asked, the one about whether I was relieved, whether it was over, whether we were safe, would ever simply be yes. Outside the window, the council station lights ran their scheduled rotation. Every few minutes the spectrum shifted. Atmospheric clears throat, welcome. Display, color-coded for 600 species. Adjusted for every kind of eye and every kind of dark, including ours. I drank my coffee. I let it sit in my chest, too hot and entirely worth it. I was not done, neither were we. That was, I had come to understand, exactly the point.